Welcome to Reddit Aliens. What is a creepy story you haven't told many people? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. When I was a preteen, I liked to rearrange my room a lot. This one particular time, I moved my bed up against my wall facing the door to the hallway. Then I put the TV on the adjacent wall, but facing at an angle so I could see it head on from my bed. Well, one night I had my light on and was watching a show. I go to turn the light off and lay in my bed, then noticed on the one wall in the room that was blank, a shadow of a figure with a head and almost a full set of shoulders. It was about halfway up the wall, a little taller than I was at the time. I was just staring at it. I couldn't move. I finally got the courage to get up a little bit and see if anything was casting the shadow. But since I just rearranged the room, there was nothing between my TV and my bed. I put my hand out and it cast a shadow next to my head. I put my head up and it cast a shadow on the wall next to the other shadow too. But that shadow didn't move. I finally got up and turned the light on, then back off, and the shadow was gone. Craziest thing ever. I immediately switched my room again and never saw it happen again. Sister, mother, and I rented a holiday home that used to be an old coach house in Cape Town. My sister decided to go out with friends for the night. Later that evening, we're getting ready to eat when we hear my sister's voice calling out to us to come to her room, like she wanted to show us something. My mom and I both froze, and when I eventually turned to my mother, she was pale as a sheet. She said to me in a clipped tone, "Don't acknowledge it." My mother is a staunch skeptic, and her reaction, I think, frightened me more than the actual voice. I was walking home from the pub in my small town with my boyfriend and 3 friends. It was around midnight in the middle of summer, and while we had a drink or so each, we weren't drunk and were just chatting or looking at the stars. The particular bit of road we were on isn't very long, but is quite old and narrow, so the pavements thin out a lot. We were walking in either twos or single file, and to my right was a thick garden hedge. As this road is also along a hill, many of the gardens drop down a lot or have steep paths winding down to their front doors. Essentially, to my right, there was mostly hedge over this drop and not a lot else. At one of the breaks in the hedge, where a front gate stood, in the corner of my eye I noticed something. It wasn't visible until the last moment, but as I passed the gate, I saw it out of the corner of my eye. I thought I saw an old bearded man standing there at the gate, staring out like a statue. He was facing out towards the pavement and almost flush with the hedge. But that wasn't the weird part. As I passed this man, only a few inches from my face, I realized he was wearing what looked like a bright yellow fisherman's hat. I passed him for maybe a few seconds and then gone. As we filed past, there was a lull in conversation and I felt myself shudder. Nobody else said anything, but it was such a strange encounter that I couldn't shake it off for a bit. There was no reason for him to be stood there at midnight and he never moved. Even his expression was fixed and staring forward. We hadn't been making enough noise for someone to come out of their house to see what the fuss was or anything, and he had been so close when we all passed by. It was just so bizarre. The conversation struck back up again once the pavement became a little wider and we could walk alongside each other again. I started to relax and felt a bit more normal again. I wondered almost if I had imagined it until around 5 minutes later, and much further on our way, my friend asked me, "Did you see that guy earlier?" When I was about 11, I was home alone at night. I was walking from the kitchen to the stairway to the head upstairs, and along the way, I had to pass the front door, which had windows on either side of it. As I was just starting up the stairs, there was a violent pounding on the front door, which was locked. I turned around to see a man outside pounding very forcefully and angrily on the door. He was wearing a black ski mask. To this day, I honestly cannot explain my behavior, but I just looked at him for a moment, and he looked at me, and then I slowly walked up the stairs as though nothing had happened. I didn't feel scared, just indifferent, like I knew nothing would come of it. The pounding stopped shortly after, and I never even told my parents about this when they got home. I don't know if I've ever told anyone, actually. When I was living in Brazil, there was this man we always saw when we drove by anywhere. He was always dressed up as Santa, but we didn't think anything about it because it was December. One day, our neighbor ran to our house, saying that they heard somebody walking inside. We called the cops, and when they entered their house, they found nothing except a sink that was turned on. They assumed the footsteps they heard was the water hitting the sink. When I was walking back to my house, I looked at the gate that was separating our houses, and I remember seeing that man, the one that was dressed as Santa, climbing the gate from my neighbor's house to ours. I don't remember anything else, but all those events are sealed inside my mind. My mom worked a lot at night, so we were by ourselves quite often. There were 5 of us in all, 2 older brothers, 2 little sisters, and me, right in the middle. I was around 8 or 9 years old when this happened, so my brothers would have been around 14 or 13, and my sisters are only 13 months younger than me. We lived in a crappy apartment in a bad neighborhood, and when we were bored, we'd play our version of hide and seek. It involved turning off every light in the house, seeker given a flashlight, and as you're looking, you get to call out, "Whistle," 3 times, and everyone had to whistle from their hiding spot. I was usually it. I was bad at hiding, so I preferred it if we were just starting the game and it was storming outside, thunder and lightning going off. Not our best idea in hindsight, but we aren't what I'd call a bright group. To do this, I need to explain the layout of the downstairs. The front door was right next to the stairs. 2 paths. One leads you directly to the kitchen, the other into the living room. We had 2 couches, one against the wall next to a door that led to the back of the apartment building, the other with its back facing the dining room with another wider opening to the kitchen. I found my oldest brother fairly quickly because he had used the opportunity to pop out from around the corner and scare me after a few minutes. I called out, "Okay, whistle." I was confused when I heard 4 distinct whistles, and I looked at my bro who was sitting on the couch. "Why'd you whistle?" He looked at me equally confused. I didn't. I pointed the flashlight at him and called out, "Whistle again," and my blood turned to ice when I again heard 4 whistles and my brother didn't open his mouth. I saw all the color drain from his face as he heard it and walked over to the living room light and turned it on as he ordered, "Everyone come out right now." My other brother popped up from behind the couch. My sister climbed out from under the table. My last very thin, very tiny sister stood up from behind a large plant on the floor we gathered in the living room, unsure of what to do, so I decided to call out once more. Okay, whistle again." A whistle came from the still dark kitchen. We looked at each other, my younger sisters clinging to each other, as one crept towards the kitchen. We were barely leaning in the doorway, my brother's hand reaching for the switch, when I lifted the still-lit flashlight to the opening that led to the front door and screamed. Everyone else joining in a split second later as we took in the sight of an absolutely psychotic-looking junkie homeless person crouched in the opening, smiling at us. His mouth seemed stretched unnaturally wide on his face, flashing rotten blackened teeth, his bloodshot eyes flashing in the light, his dirty brown hair hanging in tangled knots on his head, his hands grasped in front of him, but he wasn't wearing any shoes, and all his toes were missing their nails and were steadily turning this nasty greenish yellow from infection. He screamed right as we screamed, which only made him even scarier. We probably stood there a good 30 seconds just screaming our heads off. When he lurched forward on hands and knees towards us, grunting, his eyes never blinking, that moment I threw the flashlight full force and hit him right between the eyes. He squealed and landed on his side, clutching his head. We promptly turned and ran out the back door in the pouring rain, barefoot and in our pajamas, right to a neighbor's friend's house and pounded on their door until they opened it, to which we shoved ourselves inside and slammed the door. I was crying along with my sisters while my brothers were trying to tell them what happened, but were pretty much just screaming. They got the gist of it though and called the cops. One was always patrolling nearby, and he caught the guy right as he was trying to hide by climbing into the dumpster in the parking lot. Apparently, someone had lost the key to their apartment, and cause the landlord was a cheap asshole. He'd only used like 3 kinds of keys for the apartment building, so the homeless junkie looking for cash to buy more drugs had simply tried the key on the doors until he got to one that opened. He thought we were either asleep or not home because the lights are off, but then he saw my flashlight and tried to hide, but in his damaged mind, when he realized we were playing, decided to join in. Needless to say, we moved out soon after. When I was about 19, I worked in a bar. Several of the customers would ask me how I was, always there when I also worked at the casino. Whenever I heard this, I always told them, "No, I don't work at the casino, that's somebody else." A few people didn't believe me, but I didn't press the issue because I honestly felt a little annoyed at the idea that somebody looks exactly like me. A few years later, when I was a senior in university, someone sent me someone's Instagram. It was definitely the guy. Not only did he look like me, it was me, but he was wearing things I didn't own, doing things I hadn't done. It felt violating. One of the weirdest things was, at the time, I was in a gay relationship with a slightly older black guy, and, of course, so was he. His boyfriend looked very similar to mine, but not identical in the way I was to my imposter. My mom has a brother and sister. Her sister had a daughter I'm close in age to, and her brother had a baby when we were 9 or 10. I had a dream that our new baby cousin was begging me for help and crying. The girl cousin I was close to had the exact same dream at the same time. We never told anyone. A couple of years later, uncle and his wife had a nasty divorce. Wife drugged our cousin because he couldn't sit still and leave her alone for 8 hours. I remember him crying after taking Ritalin because his head hurt and he didn't feel right. There was nothing I could do then, but always wondered if it would have been different if we had spoke up. We had a really fun night outside, eating in a fancy restaurant and going clothing shopping, I believe, and we all craved for some ice cream. There was a really close sweets place near our house, but since we were outside and far away, we decided to go to another one that was near the main road. We were in our car, driving to our destination until we stopped because there was traffic. I was confused because it was in the middle of the night, not to mention it was either a Wednesday or a Thursday, so I didn't expect to see traffic. The main road had an open field just near where we were located. I saw a shirtless man in the middle of the green field. The area was surrounded by police vehicles. The man was bloodied up and he had his back turned toward us. He had a knife in his hands. He was cutting himself. I didn't know what was happening. I was 12 years old. My parents didn't pay any mind to it. Maybe because my father is a doctor and my mother is a nurse, so they see cases like this a lot. My brother was visibly shocked as well and drove off. It was on the news 2 days later. Turns out the man tried to overdose but couldn't, but he used so much he couldn't tell his surroundings or the pain. He was numb to pain. It was a creepy scene for me because I was 12 and dark, and the only light was coming from the police vehicles and it was directed at the said guy. So the only view I had was the dark place, but a light was shining. But the light shining towards was a dying man. What? I'm low-key a Grim Reaper, or at least it seems. When I was a teenager, my best friend's dad went in for a hip surgery. We were at school, and I suddenly felt weird in a way I couldn't describe. I felt like I needed to find her and ask about him. There was no reason to feel anything was amiss. He was a pretty healthy going in, and this wasn't an emergency or anything. Later that night, she called me in panicked tears. A blood clot, unrelated to the surgery, had broken off and traveled to his brain, and he had been declared brain dead. He was taken off life support the following day. 15 years ago, my husband had a friend whose mother had terminal stomach cancer. We knew it was a matter of when and not if. One day I was sitting on the couch, and again, for some unknown reason, I felt compelled to ask my husband, "Have you heard from friend?" He said no, he hadn't heard from him in about 3 days. I said, "I feel like you need to call him, like now." So he did, and friend didn't answer. It was a few days later he called back and told my husband, "Sorry I didn't answer your call, man. You called right as she was passing away." My dad died March 2020. The day before I went to visit my parents, my dad fell asleep in his chair. I almost left without saying goodbye to him because I didn't want to disturb him, but something made me turn back. I went back in the house, gently kissed the top of his head to wake him up, told him I was leaving, gave him another kiss, and told him I loved him. I told my husband, "I think I just saw my dad for the last time." I was wrong about that, but the next day at work I was on edge all day, ready to pick fights with people. When someone asked, I said, "I think I'm losing my dad today." My mom brought him to the ER that day, so I left work to go be with them. He died abruptly in the ER about 2 hours later. He was talking to me, then he laid down on the chair, and a few minutes later, he just flatlined. There was more to the journey after this, but the point is he died that day, after I told everyone at work that I thought he would. This month, I had 2 friends whose parents died. Both of them I predicted, for lack of a better word. One had breast cancer, and again, it was clearly when, not if. And during a discussion about the situation, I said to my husband and some of our mutual friends that I thought she would die that day. She did. The other friend, her dad, had a neurological event that preceded cardiac arrest, and I said he would be dead by Saturday, the first week of the month. He died on Saturday. I never tell people who experience the loss, though my husband did tell his friend that I had insisted he needed to call him at that moment, a moment that ended up being an absolutely terrible moment to do so, unfortunately. So, it feels so cringe to talk about this. My house isn't haunted per se, like there aren't random knocking sounds, ghostly whispers, or glasses flying off tables, but there have been some weird, unexplainable incidents. Pretty rare, but still spooky. The time I was sick, I had horrible abdominal cramps, so bad that I felt kind of out of it from the pain, and was lying in a groaning self-pity puddle on the floor. No fever, mind you, just pain. At one point, I glanced up at the sight of movement above me in my peripheral vision, and saw what looked like two 50 to 60-ish aged men dressed in historical garb standing over me. They looked like they'd stepped out of a black and white TV, like grayscale. They seemed to be discussing me among themselves, since they'd kept pausing to stare down at me with very lofty, disdainful looks before returning to their conversation. But it was as if they were on mute. There was no sound at all. My reaction amounted to, sure, okay, whatever, I guess. It didn't strike me as that weird, which is weird in and of itself. After a few minutes, I looked back up, and they're gone. Well, after, I felt better. I kept thinking about it. I wasn't having a fever dream. I just felt a bit out of it. My area used to be heavy-duty Dutch settler territory, and when I looked up pictures of the period clothing, yep, we've got a match. And their appearance, all gray, no sound, reminded me of other descriptions I'd heard of ghosts. So yeah, part of me still wonders if I had two snobby Dutch colonialists, ghost watching me groan and writhe on the floor like, why I never, look at this trollop, how utterly pathetic. Nothing seemed creepy until 2 weeks ago when it touched me. One night, I came back and went to bed, but before I did, I remember feeling this odd feeling, like someone was watching me. I put it off thinking I was just tired. Fast forward to about 8 a.m. and I have this dream that I'm being chased by this ghostly looking woman and I was stuck in my bed. When I woke up, I had a bloody nose. I put this off thinking it's one of those dreams. Next night I come home late and I go to bed. But when I'm sleeping, I get woken up with this sense that I'm being watched again. When I woke up, I was rolled away from my girlfriend and decided to roll over to face her. When I did, she was gone, and I see a dark, shadowy figure walking over to me that looked like my girlfriend, and she reached out to me, or I thought. My girlfriend, who just woke up next to me, thirsty for water, lifted her head up that was tucked under her pillow to get water. I flipped out, going from a sleepy state to fully awake and adrenaline coursing through me, explaining to my girlfriend what just happened. Anyways, I ended up just getting up and starting my day a little earlier than normal. The night after, I'm off home from work and go to bed early with my girlfriend. We are cuddling and fall asleep. I don't know what it was, but my toe was grabbed like in a way to pull up the sheet and my foot. I kicked and sprang up, thinking someone was at the edge of my bed. My girlfriend, who was watching TikToks on my chest, also what happened because she was laying on top of me before I sprung up. The room was empty. We saged our apartment. This isn't the first time something like this has happened, but damn was it definitely one of the craziest.